Even though I was a researcher at the University of Queensland, and the co-authors of my paper were professors in universities all around the world in a range of disciplines. But the way the Wall Street Journal characterised us was just a blogger and examined like a couple of my roommates or just people I just dragged on the street to do this analysis. The Global Warming Policy Foundation is a conservative think tank in England. They published a report, which was basically the whole report was attacking our paper. And a conservative think tank in Canada, Friends of Science, which is a rather Orwellian title, published a similar presentation, the Consensus Project, which is trying to be like the antithesis of our study. Republican politicians have a number of them have come out and spoken against that paper. Ted Cruz was on, I think this was an interview with Katie Couric. Rick Santorum was on Bill Maher attacking our paper. And in fact, just this Friday night, Jeffrey Lord was on Bill Maher as well. And so he seems to like inviting Republicans to go on the show or conservatives and attack my study. So, thanks, Bill. But one thing I was aware of, having studied this area, is the attacks on our study was just the latest chapter in a long history of attacks on climate change and the scientific consensus on climate change, and really trying to confuse the public about the level of scientific agreement amongst experts. So my primary interest in this area is developing ways to counter misinformation. Like, how do we respond? What do we do about it? And I happen almost by accident to bump into this branch of psychological research called Inoculation Theory. Now, I'm selfishly going to buy myself some time by leaving most of the explanation to Josh, who's talking on this topic later. But just very briefly, Inoculation Theory borrows the idea of vaccination, where you can give people resistance to a disease by exposing them to a weak form of the disease. With inoculation, the way I apply it is I help people develop resistance to misinformation by exposing them to a weak form of misinformation. And so there was an experiment done just at George Mason University, just published a few weeks ago, that looked at this. What they did was they exposed different types of information about climate change to participants in the experiment. For one group on the left, they just showed them the 97% consensus and found that it had a strong positive effect in raising their perceived scientific agreement. For another group, they showed them some misinformation about the thing, and I've kind of changed the labels to make it a bit more hipster and friendly, the misinformation, alternative facts. But the really interesting thing about this experiment was when they showed them both types of information, the fact and the alternative fact, they cancel each other out. And this really, I guess, a really concise summary of this dynamic is this tweet by the chess master Kasparov, saying that the point of misinformation isn't just to misinform, but to annihilate truth. And I think that's a real key way of thinking about it. When fact and alternative facts collide, it's like when matter and antimatter collide. There's a big explosion of heat and light, and kind of you're left with nothing, and cancel each other out. And that's what this experiment is showing. So what do we do about that? How do we counter, how do we neutralize alternative facts and misinformation? What they did in this experiment was they tried inoculating people before showing them misinformation. And this is an excerpt of the inoculating text that they showed their participants. Basically, there's two elements to an inoculation. You need to warn people of the threat of the misinformation, and then you need to counter-argue against it. And so in this study, there was several examples of counter-arguing against the misinformation. The misinformation was a petition of 31,000 people signing a statement saying that humans weren't disrupting the climate. And they explained how those 31,000 people, it was an online petition, so anyone could sign up, so there were a number of fake names. 31,000 is actually a very small number when you consider the number of Americans who have got a Bachelor of Science. And most importantly, over 99% of the 31,000 people weren't climate scientists. They had nice degrees in computer science and mechanical engineering and medical science, but no actual expertise in climate science. And they found that when they inoculated people against the misinformation and then showed them the misinformation, that mostly neutralized the influence of the misinformation. So the facts were allowed to, I guess, have a positive effect again. So at the same time that Dr. Mason were doing this study, I was at the University of Queensland on the other side of the world, running almost an identical study, completely unaware of this research being done. But there's some differences in the way I did it. This was the inoculating text that I showed. By coincidence, I happened to use the exact same misinformation as they did. But what I was doing in my study was, rather than counter-arguing the specific misinformation, I was arguing against the general techniques being used. So I just explained the technique of fake experts, using people who had the appearance of expertise but didn't actually possess the relevant scientific expertise. And what I found, and I didn't mention the 31,000 petition at all, I was just talking about this technique in general terms. What I found was this orange line is a group who was showing just the misinformation, and we see that overall there was a negative effect, but conservatives were disproportionately affected. The decrease in perceived consensus was greatest among this group. But when people were inoculated first, it neutralised misinformation across the political spectrum. And this gives me a little bit of hope, because it shows that no one likes to be misled. No one likes the idea of being tricked by fallacies and arguments designed to mislead people, even when it's a group who is predisposed to believe in misinformation. So I've taken the psychological research into debunking and inoculation and try to shape it into a general, I guess, structure, a template that I use when responding, because I think this is an ongoing field of research, but in the meantime, as I showed earlier, the research is being attacked on nearly a daily basis, and needs responding to. So this is what I've developed based on the research that's available at the time. And really there's three elements to responding to misinformation or attacks on the research, and that's the most important thing is still communicating the facts. But as we see, facts and myths can cancel each other out. So what you really need is the inoculation, explaining the technique that the misinformation uses. And it's like, it gives people a way to resolve the conflict between the fact and the myth. And how much time have I done? So I'll give you a few quick examples. So often when newspapers will publish an opinion piece attacking my research, I'll request to write a reply. Here's an example of after the Financial Press published an article in my paper, they, to my surprise, let me post a reply. And so I used that template. Like the green area is just explaining the facts about climate change and the scientific consensus. The red is introducing the myth to them, and then the blue is explaining the fallacy, the technique that the myth uses to distort the facts. Another example was the Australian, which is a conservative newspaper in Australia. They published an opinion piece in the weekend edition, so I requested a reply, and they said, all right, well, you can publish in the same, in the next weekend edition. So I sent my piece in, and they published it. The green area there is my piece, but they also published, surrounded it with articles attacking the consensus. So I guess it's a warning that when you're going into hostile, you're really, I guess, playing in a, they've got homegrown advantage, so there's risks involved as well. And yeah, so if you've got time to answer any questions.
How do your findings relate specifically to the area of personal attacks, of character assassination? Because the examples you use here of politicians, yes, politicians, for example, to my understanding, they attack your work rather than yourself. So how does that procedure relate to personal attacks on individuals with a specific with the similar reputations rather than disagreements on whatever basis?
Yeah, I mean, I've tended to sidestep that a little bit. Like there have been both personal attacks and attacks on the research and attacks on the science in general. And as a scientist, I've moved the discussion into that area. I think I guess it's a more robust ground for me to stand on. And I really look at these opportunities to raise science literacy levels and raise critical thinking. Like use attacks as educational opportunities. So yeah, I can't really speak to the personal attack stuff. I tend to see that as I know that this whole conference is about how relevant and damaging they are. I tend to make the argument when I respond, at least, that it's not about the person, it's about science. So, yeah. I can't really offer any insights into that. I'm looking forward to getting insights from other people.
It goes definitely within the character assassination perspective, because even the process of this was an methodical attack, an attack upon your research, which in effect involves a certain form of ad hominem arguments, etc. They shift the focus from logos, from the logical world, the scientific world, on aesthetic aspects. This called this character assassination. What is very interesting is the manner that you can use and deal with character assassination attacks by shifting the discussion into argumentation, and highlighting the fallacy. So it is exactly character assassination.
Yeah, I mean, where the character attack ends and the research attack starts. It's a bit of a grey area. They're really trying to achieve the same thing. And I think that when you kind of kill two birds with one stone by explaining the fallacies that an attacker uses against you, I guess by implication it's discrediting them, their attacking source.
By the way, critical argumentation theory provides for each form of ad hominem argument 3 or 4 critical questions that can be employed to deconstruct this argument and move the discussion back from interest to law, from the personal character assassination to deliberate situation. This can be explored both in a discursive level and as a way to diffuse character attacks. It can be very useful instrument on top of manipulation strategies. And Walter has a very good
One more question?
Do you have any thoughts, John, about sort of moving to a sort of interpersonal context, or sort of in a context of mass media and people? I'm sorry. Do you have any thoughts about the option of moving a discussion into a more interpersonal context as a way of interacting?
Yeah, I think that's a much better format for engagement than the mass media, in a way, because if you can get into a dialogue with a person, then you can, in a constructive way, if they have arguments against, you can explore what are those arguments and deconstruct them. Like really, this idea of inoculation, the process you go through is take an argument and deconstruct it into its various premises leading to conclusion, and then once you've done that, you can identify all the points, if any, where there are either logical fallacies leading to conclusion or false premises at the start. So, of course, it has to be done with sensitivity, but if you can have a dialogue with people and walk them through what is the justifications for their arguments, or what are the consequences of that conclusion, then potentially you can, I guess, take them or walk with them to the place where they might see potential weaknesses in the theory.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good. Our next speaker has come to us from the University of Vienna, Jens Seiffert-Brockmann. He's going to talk about questioning CEO's character and values in corporate crises.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here today. Welcome, everybody. As you can see, character assassination of CEOs in crisis. I'm from the Corporate Communication Research Group at the Department of Communication at the University of Vienna, and the piece I'm presenting here is a co-work I did together with Sabina Eipela and another colleague of mine, Julia Stranz, who are not here today. But of course, they're sending their regards too. So, what am I going to do within the next 10 to 12 minutes is this little short agenda, and I want to start by saying something about studying character assassination from maybe not only a political point of view, but from a more general point of view. I will then say something about character assassination, in particular in business, tell you about the study design we came up with, show you some results, and talk about the implications and limitations of the studies, and I will finally have some conclusions. So, some thoughts on studying character assassination. Well, when Sergei came to Vienna like 1.5 years ago, everybody was like, getting up his ears when he came with the term character assassination, because, usually in public relations and strategic communication, it's not the kind of research you would cross, because, people are dealing with ethics and how to get everything better and public social responsibility and stuff like that. So, but then I began to, take a read and start reading the book that Martin and Eric wrote, and read some subsequent pieces on character assassination. And I came along the definition that Sergei, Martin, Eric, and Jennifer came up with, that character assassination is a deliberate and sustained effort to damage the reputation or credibility of an individual. And of course, credibility and reputation are extremely important in business. So I thought to myself, well, maybe there is a possibility to extend character assassination beyond politics, because in the Landmark book, character assassination throughout the ages is almost always politics. And I'm doing some sort of a big research project on the second PhD on evolutionary psychology and strategic communication, and this totally fits with evolutionary psychology and everything we know about how the human mind was shaped by evolution. And as Barthe, one of evolutionary psychologists, says, because of its ubiquity, reputational factors constitute a major selective force in human evolution. So, the point is, if reputation is super important for politics, why wouldn't it be for CEOs, or for sports stars, or for everybody? So that's why we came up with the idea to get something started in the first project, and I think it's going to be followed up already, or it's already followed up with another experiment with images in sports, and I guess we're going to go do more about it. So we thought, what can we actually contribute for being communication researchers? And, well, first, of course, and that's what we did here, we can give an account of the phenomenon in the media by doing something like a content analysis. The second is, we can look for the perception of the phenomenon among recipients of mass media and, of course, among communicators. We can do surveys. And, of course, which I think is the most important thing, we can look for the variables, the conditions that make up for character assassination and the effects actually character assassination has in the public by doing surveys and experiments. So we began, obviously, obviously with what is closest to us, we tried to look how CEOs are actually portrayed in the press in a crisis situation, because if there's character assassination, we assume it would be most likely to happen in situations of crisis. So, and when we did our literature review, there were like two very prominent concepts that seemed very promising to us. First one is, of course, values in business. There's a lot of legion research, and I've just shown you two examples here. For example, saying that integrity and trustworthiness are an outcome of proclaimed values by CEOs. And of course, also that the congruence of values between leaders, stakeholders, so to say, will result in a higher satisfaction and a bigger willingness to support. And the same is true for the CEO's display of the character traits which are set to enhance things like corporate performance, corporate reputation, or very important to internal identification between the management and the employees inside the company. So we came up with two research questions, which I will read out now. Okay. The first was, how do the news media portray the character and values of CEOs of companies that undergo a crisis? And second then, is there a relation between the media's attribution of specific character traits and values to CEOs and their remainder in power during and after a crisis? Well, since nobody really has done character assassination in communication science so far, we didn't start by going through the normal process and coming up with hypotheses, but technically the hypotheses are present in the works I've already cited in character assassination throughout the ages. So by addressing this kind of research question, we had that in mind, but we wanted to remain open to the results, to have a more explorative approach rather than the standard application of the scientific method, which would be only. So, this is our study design. Pretty boring, but reliable. We did a content analysis of press coverage of CEOs during corporate crisis between January 2010 and March 2016. And we're, of course, analyzing CEOs. And since we're in Austria, we're doing best. We are doing what we can do best, namely analyzing communication in German. So we winded up with 28 CEOs, 9 from Austria and 19 from Germany. And you see it's a rather small sample, which means there seems to be not that much crisis in Austria and Germany. But nevertheless, you would be surprised. Well, okay. This is like an extraction from our codebook, and important is the split variable we took from making our t-test was the retention office. So the question, did the CEO actually stay in his with his job over the course of the research period? And I say he because and then we came up with two concepts. One character aspect as designed by Seiffert-Brockmann in 2004, with the dimensions of competence, integrity, reliability, charisma, and personal dimensions. And we used the values as measured by Schwartz and colleagues in 2012. And most importantly, there, of course, self-enhancement dimension or an achievement, which we thought would be the most obvious thing to look for. But of course, we also included the other values in Schwartz values. And then, of course, we were looking for the tonality of the press coverage, look whether there's a positive, neutral, ambivalent, or negative attribution towards the character aspects. So, these are just the plain numbers. I just wanted to show you for effect, like a lot of numbers. Basically, what it says that, as we expected, most of the coverage is on competence. But as you can see, 23% and 90% also are related to integrity. And as we expected, when looking at values, 58% of the coverage are concerned with power or achievement, which seems only natural when you're looking at CEOs in business who are actually there to achieve something with it. So these are the gentlemen which we looked at. I'm pretty sure most of them don't mean anything to you, maybe except for Martin Luther King. I understand he's a pretty popular guy in the US after Volkswagen debacle. And I'm just saying that we would have expected to be the tonality of the press coverage much more negative, but well, especially every German loves his car. We're not so much surprised that despite the big struggle and scandal and post-war history, didn't make such a big impact on Martin Luther King, at least over a long time period. So we were rather surprised, but nevertheless, we found some things. Well, the first thing we found was that there was no significant relationship between staying in the office and the dimensions and character of competence, reliability, personal dimension. And that's interesting insofar that we thought that competence should play some role, right? Because, you know, one likes to think that the person in charge is competent for doing what she's doing. As we heard yesterday in one of the presentations, that it obviously didn't help Hillary Clinton to be the most competent person for the job. And it's kind of astonishing that you have some sort of a result pointing in the same direction. When it comes to crisis and to the character of the person, it's obviously not the competence that is most important, but it's charisma and it's integrity. And for integrity, we found that this is the most attacked characteristic dimension in character, and on the other hand, charisma is the one which is mostly praised in a CEO. And that's what it looks when you put it on a graph. And you can see that for those, the white columns, who had to leave their office, they had a rather strong negative impact on their integrity, where there were no difference between them on the positive tonality. But on the other hand, for those who stayed in office, obviously charisma was like huge, had a huge effect to help to bolster the CEO's character. And for values, we could find that in general, when somebody was forced to leave his office or leave his job, that the respective CEO's values were on a much stronger public scrutiny than of those who actually stayed in power. And of course, as expected, self-enhancement, power and achievement play the most important role. So it's unclear here whether this helps those who stayed in office or didn't, because you know, we also had a lot of cases where the CEO had to leave office, but obviously it was like a positive feedback on the CEO. So, to sum it up quickly, the limitations, well, as most of you surely know, content analysis cannot find any effects on CA, so obviously we have all the implications, and we're not really sure if this is character assassination that took place. So we can only suggest or assume that this actually took place, because unlike in politics, power struggles are not that public. They're more behind the scenes because CEOs are not directly accountable to the public, unlike politicians. So it's also not clear if the allegations that turned up in the press are placed there intentionally. And of course, it's unclear whether these correlations would actually hold in other countries or cultures. So we didn't see any difference for Austria and Germany, which is not much of a surprise. So now the great part for Serge, Martin, Eric, and Jennifer, because as they predicted, values are under very close scrutiny in a crisis situation. So the values of a character are actually questioned and analyzed. Also in line with their predictions is that the deliberate attacks focus on the public image, and especially on morals, that somehow equate values and integrity of the person in question. And on the other hand, it seems that charismatic leaders seem to have a bonus in this kind of, let's say, competitions around or settings of character assassinations. And as sad as it sounds, it seems like something like this helped people like Donald Trump. You can say a lot about him, but he's not boring. He seems to have some. He seems to enthrall his supporters, so it's something he's not shown very well, or very nicely in the data. So, final, before I'm done, is practical and theoretical implications. Most important to me is, of course, the theoretical implications, since I'm a researcher, and I think we should take this character assassination way forward. Or as I said, what can we as communication science or critical communication science contribute? And I think what we should do is do more thorough research in terms of methods, and that's, for example, surveys, questionnaires, and experiments, just as John presented with the Inoculation Theory. Next, case studies. And we should come up with a research model to actually get an idea of what are the antecedents of character assassinations, what are its effects, in which circumstances does it work, when doesn't it work, to get a more thorough understanding of how it actually influences our social lives. I mean, as I said at the beginning, evolutionary psychology suggests that all humans are basically the same. So it's a phenomenon that could affect all of us, so we should all be interested. Thank you very much. Okay, what just said, two questions.
Thanks. I was just kind of curious. I noticed that you used a lot of basically publicly available documentation to ascertain media coverage, basically, of the CEOs you studied. I wonder if it would be beneficial to get inside the organization and study primary documents and other media that might be available inside the organization to ascertain what the board of directors was thinking about the CEO of the organization, to get a more full picture of political intrigue inside the organization.
That would be fantastic, but unfortunately, I kind of doubt that they do. At least in Germany and Austria, they are very secretive when it comes to doing studies inside the organization.
I totally agree with that. I don't think it's much different here, but it's all about relationships and get that PAO guy to take that battle forward for you.
I know that this wasn't a focus of your study, but I was wondering that in doing your content analysis, if that you found that part of the explanation in terms of positive versus negative coverage may have been how effective the corporate spokespeople were in terms of getting out there and trying to spin things.
Well, of course, because as you can see, more resources an organization has. I think it was a recurring theme from yesterday. The more likely it is, of course, to get the message out. And, I mean, if you look at the Deutsche Bank or Volkswagen, for example, they have catastrophic, let's say, track record for the last years, but nevertheless, the images of their CEOs are still good. So obviously, there is some power behind public relations and it helps them get the message out. But I think the smaller the business gets, the harder it becomes to raise the message. And well, it's, in terms of culture, it's a little bit different than in Austria too, because there's a little bit more, let's say, organized culture. You buddy with someone in much more in a way than it is in Germany, but that will be, of course, in Germany. But you're absolutely right. I think you would see an effect there if you look for it. But thank you very much.
Good. Next speaker is Lee Rami Allen, who is from Howard University, is a skills communications specialist. That's skills with a capital US, and is going to talk about hashtag Team Teacher.
Good morning, everyone. Okay, I'm super nervous about this because this area is not an area that I usually research. So my background is in mass media, organizational communications, and then ultimately media studies. So I've taught in secondary, community college, as well as the university levels. Currently, I'm teaching strategic legal communications. And my focus is in public relations because I'm also a public relations practitioner. So I work in radio, public information, promotions and marketing, with athletes and entertainers and image creation, not so much repair, but image creation and maintaining that image. I also had the opportunity to work in K-12 public education program planning, so working with human resource departments, helping to train educators on how to communicate with families, how to deal with crises that take place in school. And so when this concept about character assassination came along, I was very curious about how educators are impacted by that. So typically, I am researching areas of popular culture, sports, stereotypes, specifically in television and film, and how that resonates with us in real life. So as you see, much of what I research is about the intersection of gender in those areas. And so character assassination in regards to perceptions of men and women is something that I thought, maybe this is a way for me to learn more about this phenomenon. And so I was motivated by this as a professor, but more so as a PR practitioner, because I think even though you are teaching, if you are in the area of PR, everything you do is still based on that thought. So even in my department, there are 100 staff people in school communications, and in my department there are about 35. And so when we get ready to take a photo for the group, we are the ones that are like, no, you need to sit here. Okay, you need to wear that. If you have the shirt on, you're in the middle. So everything for us is about how it looks. And so I began to think about, how do we as instructors look to our students? What kind of messages are we conveying? And that led me to this particular case that took the internet by storm. So there was an elementary school teacher from Atlanta who every morning, faithfully, she takes a selfie. And she posted, she goes to work. In Houston, there was a male elementary school teacher who people were taking pictures of him and posting it online. I mean, he didn't even have social media accounts at the time. So what started out as this admiration and flattery turned into this huge news cycle about how these educators were dressed. And these two people were coined Teacher Bay and Mr. Steal Your Money. So let's meet them. This is Teacher Bay, the collage of her selfies directly from her social media account. She is in the 4th grade elementary cycle at an elementary school in Atlanta Public Schools. She is under 25, for exactly. And this leads to this concept of what is A. So Esquire magazine produces this article that is titled, "What the hell is that?" Because all you saw was hashtag BAE everywhere. And so BAE is an acronym for before anyone else. It's an informal way to refer to a person's boyfriend or girlfriend, short for baby. It was adopted in the Oxford Dictionary in 2014, so it's a part of our language now. And all of this was following rapper Pharrell and singer Miley Cyrus's video, "Come Get Busy." So this is a photo credit from Pharrell's site where he posts lyrics and his videos. And so after this video, there was a huge uptick in mentions on Twitter and Instagram that included everything from "I love you, babe," "baby life," "thanks, babe," "vacation," so going on a staycation to boyfriend girlfriend. which leads to our next person in our case, Mr. Steele Your Grandma. So he is posed in his classroom at his desk, like he's definitely posed. He knew that the photograph was coming. Another picture of him, I'm in the classroom, another picture of him in the hallway. All of this is posted on his Instagram site. He was reported as 70 years old. He says that he's not 70, that he's 54, but there has not been a confirmation of his age. And the origin of this concept of Mr. Steal Your Grandma actually came from a song. And so the term is defined as a man who can hunt a girl down, that's in a relationship, and basically take her away. And it's based on visually appealing aesthetics. And so R&B singer Trey Songz had several songs that was around the concept of Mr. Steal Your Grandma, because it originated from a phrase that he coined as Mr. Steal Your Girl. And so these are the lyrics that, we're just sharing. And basically he says, next time, I see you, I'm going to take you away from your girl. And so everyone on the internet went crazy when they saw this guy and hashtag Mr. Steal Your Grandma. And so comments ranging from shout outs to shuns began to rattle the internet about both Miss Brown, because her name is Patrice Brown, not Teacher Day, everybody refers to her as Teacher Day, and Mr. Randall Irvin. And so comments were about the body type, sexuality, professionalism, or lack thereof, and it definitely had an impact on their career. So it made me begin to wonder, are there characters being attacked based on their clothing, and how does that resonate with their professional presence and ability to maintain a living? And so in the case, is it shade or is it praise? So these are some of the things that were raveled on the internet. So there's one there's one Twitter person that says, this teacher and his body contrast, my child will not be attending her class. I don't care. There's another one, definitely inappropriate if you're a teacher. Someone actually started an entire rant. She called it Sanaz rant. And she created this very visually appealing cover which says why Teacher Day was wrong. And she goes on to say, let me repeat, her attire for work is inappropriate, especially for someone who works in the school, teacher or not. She continues by making a statement that really took the internet by storm, because really it's not about the tweets. Y'all know it's all about the comment section. So that the one thing that person says, it really doesn't matter. It's the conversation below that really makes a down spiral, so to speak. And so she goes on to say, this is the issue with being a woman. We don't get to just wear what we want when we want, not if you want to be respectable. There's a lot of, if I wear this, what's going to happen? If I wear that, how's that going to look to others? But guess what? She knew what she was doing when she got dressed. I'm pretty damn sure she looked in the mirror in the morning. So Sanaa is going on and on in her rant. There were other posts that states, from the pose to the clothes, she is selling something that has nothing to do with educating young minds. We work hard to redirect your youth from falling into the video H as in hole mentality, and this teacher is creating the wrong impression to our impressionable children. Whereas Mr. Steal Your Grandma actually received a magazine spread about what you can learn in regards to style tips. He began to get questions about how to maintain a physique and look. So he goes on to post, you need to drink plenty of water, don't smoke, have protected sex, drink natural juice mostly, lots of vegetables and healthy food, sleep early, wake up early. The same way your body needs water every day is the same it needs exercise. You can do it too. Healthy life is all you need. Thanks for the love. In addition to that, going back to that comment section, people were making comments about him. One of the things that took place in an Instagram post, someone alleged that he was the ex-boyfriend of Mr. Steal Your Grandma. Mr. Steal Your Grandma came out with a statement. And I say statement in air quotes because he's now a celebrity that he has to make statements when people make comments about him. And so his official statement was, when you're old and look so fine, and the women all over the world have a crush on you, jealous young men will start spreading the quote-unquote gay rumor. I have nothing against gays, and how somebody chooses to live their lives is none of my business. I'm not homophobic, but I'm not gay. Young men, instead of hating, wake up and go to the gym. Peace out. I'm all yours, ladies. And the rumor stopped after he released his statement. And so we went from comments to actual news coverage. And so I just provided some examples of local and news outlets who discussed Teacher Bay. We had an article in the Huffington Post, their Oxygen, the cable network, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which is her local newspaper, and Black Sports Online. All of them talked about how she was either harassed online for her incredible looks, or why she being shamed for her curvy body. And the Atlanta Journal-Constitution actually did, a full feature story, kind of investigative reporting about this teacher. And even in this investigative reporting, the comments began to say, well, she's not even really a teacher. She's only a paraprofessional. Okay, so is one greater than the other? She's an educator and she's working in a school district. But this is where we begin to see the character attacks take place about her work when the comments are nothing about her job or responsibility. Now, Mr. Steal Your Grandma was featured in Business Insider. Mr. Steal Your Grandma is the suavest grandpa on the internet. Fox 5, the actual affiliate here in DC, did a segment with him where he Skyped in and did an interview. And so he basically shares with Good Day DC about how he is handling this newfound fame. And then People magazine, People Celebrity, did a full spread on him, introducing Mr. Steal Your Grandma. The internet is going crazy over Houston's grandpa's good looks. And so when you look at the two in contrast, is it shade or purpose? So this is hers. Ms. Brown began receiving questions about her teaching credentials. Her body type and wardrobe became subject to scrutiny with her school community, with parents, district officials, and the school district actually released an official statement. And she was, quote unquote, counseled. And so, whether you're on the university level or secondary, elementary level, when you are counseled, that's the first step in progressive discipline. So people are now documenting. And so, that could lead to you losing your job and the ability to sustain your livelihood. So Mr. Randall received several modeling contracts. He also received glowing comments and praise. He began receiving offers for paid local, national, and international appearances, including magazine spreads, festivals, TV shows, etc. And so this comparison spurred another social media debate about the question of a double standard and how the two were being treated. And so this is Atlanta Public Schools' official statement to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and Fox 5. A lot of other media outlets picked it up, but they basically confirmed that she is employed as a paraprofessional with the district. She was given guidance regarding the employee dress code, the use of social media, and the Georgia Code of Ethics for educators. And as an educator, anytime somebody tells you about code of ethics, this is problematic in the future. And they also stated that she has been cooperative in addressing her presence on social media. Whereas this is Mr. Randall at the Essence Music Festival, where he was paid to do an appearance. We see pictures of him with various celebrities. So now he has a whole nother career, even though he's still teaching music. And so, how, why, what? And so in order to really understand why this was happening, we want to explore how the character assassination connects with expectations. And so we're looking at expectancy violation theory in regards to the teaching profession. So basically it shares with us that there are societal and individual expectations, and that contributes to how we react in regards to others' behavior. So how are teachers, quote unquote, supposed to dress up? How are teachers supposed to act? How should a lady win versus how should a man? And so, as I stated, this was really intellectual kind of curiosity on the subject matter, but I began to pull different studies to see what else was out there specifically about clothing and teacher credibility and the perceptions that students have. And so there were a lot of mixed reviews in the studies. There was, on the one hand, you should be professional, and professional means that you look like this. On the other hand, wearing jeans, students felt that the teacher or professor was more approachable. And so one thing that all of the studies lacked was, what were the age ranges of the teachers being surveyed, and what were the age ranges of the students? Because just like social media has a huge reach, society has changed in regards to what is acceptable and what's not acceptable in the workplace. And so how do we manage those expectations and our perceptions in order to avoid character attacks on educators, but also to not be a part of attacking someone else's character based on whatever our biases or perceptions are? So are we really attacking the issue or attacking the person? The issue should have been, did she violate the dress code and nothing more? Or did she violate her contract in regards to professionalism? And a thing to also note is, there at no time was a report about her receiving any unsatisfactory evaluations in the performance of her job. And so we've heard a lot about the whole premise of character assassination, what the fundamentals are. So some of the examples that I just shared with you, I saw these 4 fundamentals, and specifically with teacher base. So anonymous lies, there were a lot of people posted things and they did not have their name. Silencing. She was told to remove pictures from her social media accounts. She was not allowed to make any statements to any of the press, even though the public school district made a statement and people were reaching out to her. So she never had an opportunity to speak up for herself. The name calling. There's a whole, I just found this amazing. So I printed it out just for a visual effect, but this is like 4 pages of the news coverage that she had. And there were even news coverage in multiple languages. And all of them were calling her all types of names. And then the sexual media portion. She was called an Instagram hoe. She was said to be promiscuous, and all because of how she was dressed. And so, stereotyping is, researching stereotypes, in particular gender stereotypes, is my research area. So, of course, it's undeniable about clothing having unintentional impacts and can reinforce stereotypes. So I think we definitely saw that there. And so ultimately, it makes me say my next step is, how do we prevent character assassinations in teaching? So as instructors, as messengers, we want to be cognizant about the messages that are being conveyed, how we send and receive these messages, the impact that television and film have on how information is communicated about teachers. There are several TV shows and movies that talk about the perception of teachers, and society is picking up on that and placing those expectations on us in the classroom. And so ultimately, it's not about what it is, but about what it seems. And so if we're armed with that information, we can consider student biases and being vulnerable to those, how it impacts our instructor-student evaluations, how the Title IX office can get involved based on how students respond, and understanding that it can impact our future earnings. And so the implications that I'm moving forward with is beginning to consider how instructors protect themselves from these attacks and how institutions can protect teachers. And so some of the recommendations include really having a developed social media policy that's included in a values handbook so people understand what the expectations are. And then as an instructor, determining what your personal and professional social media posts. So if you want to post selfies all day long, you need to have a private page as opposed to a public page. And so these are just examples of these actions. But these are not things that he shared on his page, nor did Ms. Brown. And so the moral of this story, as one person states, is no one is discrediting her. They're just saying that this is not professional attire for a teacher. And so these are all of the comments that lead me to my next step in future research things is to look at the role of race and gender and character attacks. And then finally, some things that you all may be interested in as it relates to the social media phenomenon with cyberbullying in the workplace, human resource development policies, the role of educator unions and professional associations in regards to dress code. So if anybody is interested in partnering on such a study, definitely reach out to me. Thank you. Okay, two short questions if your question.
Hi, I think this is super interesting, especially as someone who's a former educator in secondary education and also as an instructor at the University of Maryland. I was wondering if you've considered the implications of character assassinations on teachers based not on looks, but ideological background. So in case you didn't know, there's a website proliferating around the internet called Professor Watchlist. And
I was going to mention the Rate My Professor.
Yeah, but this one's interesting in that it's based on like a conservative organization that is listing and then shaming college professors for their left-leaning policies, and they're finding these professors typically based on their social media accounts or things they've said on Twitter. So it's essentially character assassinations on college professors and instructors based on their ideological leanings. So I was just wondering if you considered like expanding this type of research, not based just on gender or physical appearances, but also an ideological background.
I definitely have. And I try and manage my bias as an instructor because, you have students that don't like that community service might be a part of the class. So, they're giving you a -1 on Rate My Professor, or, they're going to the chair or the dean to complain because, part of it is maybe they're just they don't want to do the work that you have set as a part of your course curriculum. But it's easier to try and assassinate your character or have others question, you professionally as opposed to, that's just not my cup of tea and I'm just not going to take that professor. So I'm definitely, I've become very curious, especially after attending this conference, about all that's out there. Even though, my lens is usually from a public relations standpoint, your lens has to always be about your public relations as a professor. So definitely.
Hello, good job on the presentation. I was wondering about the interaction of gender and age and whether Ms. Brown would have received so much flack if she was, let's say, in her 50s and 60s and posting very same pictures.
Right, and I think that's such an amazing point because, in some regards, because she is, under 25, she does not have the work experience or the world experience in her measurement in regards to how do I create a professional image, because I'm like fresh out of college. I'm still trying to figure it out. So as opposed to shaming her, the counseling should have taken place before she started teaching. And nobody had a problem with how she was dressing until people started talking about it. And all of the reports show that. So I definitely think that is a piece. Because one of the studies that I looked at about teacher perception, there was a focus group, and one of the participants responded, well, I don't think that you should carry a Gucci purse to work because that sends the wrong message to students. And I'm like, it's a slow news day. I mean, you guys know what we talk about. So now it's the type of purse you carry or shoes that you wear, but age plays a role in that. And part of that is because your earning power is different. You may be more sophisticated. So I would definitely be interested in looking at, from a focusing standpoint, what people would think about. Because, Mr. Stewie Graham, still don't know how old he is, but nobody has a problem with it. I mean, he just started a business. He's working on trademarking. He's still grandma hashtag. I mean, he has a booking agent now, and he's still teaching, and he's getting independent speakers, which has a dress code that says can't wear jeans and tight fit clothing, but we have pictures of him. Thank you so much.
Good. Next up is a duo presentation by Tyler Johnson, Assistant Professor in the Department of Political Science at the University of Oklahoma, and Amy Murphy, Assistant Professor of Political Science at Oklahoma State University, and they're going to talk about apologies and axings, image repair, and scandalized. Robert.
Haley couldn't be here. She sends her regards. Okay, in the grand tradition of conference presentations, the title on the program and the title on the screen does not fully capture what I'm going to be doing here today. Tale of Souls time, I suppose. I promise that I will get to the image repair portion of the presentation, but first I want to talk a little bit about the breaking of the image of the nonprofit in the first place. The research that Dr. Murphy and I are working on right now is research that was inspired by a bit of character assassination in the form of an email forward. This is an email forward that has been circulating around the internet since the mid-2000s. Snopes.com tracks it all the way back to 2005. It is an email forward that is seemingly unkillable. It seems to pop up every year or so around Christmas, maybe because that's the time of year when people are thinking about giving. This is the sort of email that you yourself may have received at one point, I don't know, from a crazy uncle or someone you went to high school with that you no longer talk to. But this sort of thing, Snopes has called it almost entirely inaccurate, and the portions of it that aren't inaccurate are wildly outdated, and yet it still seems to circulate. And it's an email forward that purports to tell the reader about some nonprofits that are trustworthy and that you should consider donating to for one reason or another, while other nonprofit organizations have serious fiscal flaws. Some of these flaws are related to how they spend the donations that come in. Others of these flaws are related to what the CEO decides to pay himself and the perks that he or she receives as part of the job. So this email forward got us thinking very generally about information flows and attitudes toward nonprofits. There are a few different ways we can think about information and a few different ways we can think about attitudes. If you want to hear how does positive information affect attitudes toward nonprofits, 5 weeks from now at the Midwest Political Science Association annual conference, Dr. Murphy and I will be giving that portion of this research. Hopefully, because I'm giving the talk here, she'll give the talk there. Lessen my load a little bit. When we think about attitudes, we can think about how information might affect which nonprofits you give money to and how much you're willing to give to these nonprofits, and which nonprofits you're seeking to avoid in the future. Today, though, I'm going to talk about traits of nonprofits, and I'll lay out what those traits are here in a few moments. So specifically, I'm going to talk about negative information's effects on how we evaluate nonprofits. I've been thinking a lot about how to fit this under the character assassination umbrella. This research sort of clearly fits under the, I suppose, RP portion of CARP, the reputation politics, and that we're focusing this research on image repair.
But there is a good deal of research out there that takes a look at the essential, the crucial nature of character to the performance of nonprofits. This idea that character is a must in the relationship between nonprofits and individual donors, the relationship between nonprofits and elected officials, the relationship between nonprofits and the bureaucrats who they oftentimes have to work with in implementing policy. On the assassination end of the question here, a lot of what I'm going to be talking about in the survey experiment that we ran deals with CEO malfeasance of one sort or another, either gross inefficiency in spending donations that come in, or what we call pay and perks, which is paying the CEO a large salary and giving that individual all sorts of trappings that shouldn't seemingly come with an organization focused on helping communities, helping the needy, helping the underserved, and so forth. So in some ways, what I'm talking about here might feel a little bit like character suicide or character homicide rather than character assassination. But in some ways, the CEO malfeasance provides the ammunition by which or with which outsiders can take down a nonprofit. So it seems like every few months or so, we see a story in the media akin to this that broke a few years ago, where these hiring officials of the Wounded Warriors Project, it was revealed, were spending the money that was coming in not on projects to help warriors, but on lavish conferences and massive parties for donors and so forth. Headlines of this sort seemingly popping up every so often, where CEOs get six-figure, or even in some cases seven-figure deals to run these nonprofits. I read one story where a CEO was taking money out of the coffers of the nonprofit to pay for their child's private education. It's no wonder with headlines like this that these sorts of email forwards become eminently believable, and we also run into a situation in which watchdog groups start pointing out which charities have these sort of problems and which nonprofits are trustworthy, are spending money in the way we'd like to see it spent. So as to not make this a 25-minute presentation, I sort of realized in practicing this that I had about a 25-minute presentation stuffed into a 12-minute bag. I'm going to jump past a lot of things that are important, but I'm going to get to the nuts and bolts of what we did. We ran a survey experiment via the Amazon Mechanical Turk pool of respondents. It's a survey experiment that we ran in a few phases here. You'll get to see two different phases of this, the sort of character assassination phase and the image repair phase. We had about 800 people who took this survey. It's a pretty standard format for a survey experiment. They partook in a pre-test that asked them about 15 questions or so about demographic information, political leanings, religiosity, and their recent history of charitable and religious giving. After they took part in this pretest, they then moved into the informational prompt or treatment phase of this survey experiment. And in this phase, so as to not bias our results with pre-existing beliefs on real nonprofits, we've been talking a lot about fake news recently. Well, this is fake, hashtag fake nonprofits. We created a group that we named America Together. Essentially, America Together is a slightly less successful version of the United Way. We went to the United Way's website. We took a very short description of the United Way. We changed a bunch of the words. We made it slightly less prominent. And we created this group. And then we created some simulated press releases about this organization that our survey respondents would read. And so in the first phase of this experiment, we have three groups. We have a group that received this control treatment, which is essentially just a one-paragraph description of this simulated nonprofit. It tells how big it is, it tells how successful it is, it tells all sorts of things that this nonprofit does in the community. Individuals in another group received this control information, and in addition, received this simulated press release from a group called Charity Watch. This is a real group, and it's sort of interesting to think about a watchdog group as a character assassin. But this is the sort of group that combs through the financial documents of nonprofits and releases information on who they think is doing a good job and who they think is inefficient. And so in the simulated press release, this group Charity Watch has given our fake nonprofit group an F when it comes to their how they spend their money. They spend 10% of their donations on programs to help communities and 90% on overhead. So this is a sort of inefficient nonprofit when it comes to taking donations and getting them out into the world. So some of our respondents got this information, as well as that control information. And then a third group of respondents got that controlled description of America Together, and in addition got this information about how America Together has a CEO that makes $2.5 million a year, yearly housing stipend, private jet, chauffeured luxury car. These are the sort of things that a very small set of nonprofit CEOs have access to, but oftentimes this is the sort of information that gets the public angry about the process of donating to these nonprofits. Today I'm going to focus on these traits, whether or not this negative information has effects on competence, honesty, trustworthiness, leadership, judgment, morality, whether or not the nonprofit shares my values, cares about the needs of people like me, cares about the needs of people like those in my community. I do not want to drown you in tables and statistical models. There will be a table or two coming up here. But we ran our own logit models with a good number of controls, and unsurprisingly, these scandals had massive negative and significant effects on evaluations of this nonprofit. What I think is most interesting about these negative and significant evaluations of the nonprofit on the part of the people who received those character assassinating treatments is that across the board, people who received that treatment about inefficiency, the idea that the nonprofit was spending 10% of the money on programs and 90% on overhead, those people reacted far more negatively than the people who heard about the CEO getting paid the big salary and getting all those perks. In some of the cases, there's about a 6 percentage point difference in how negatively they reacted. In some of the cases here, it's over 20% more negative responses to that inefficiency than to this scandal involving the pay and the perks. The second phase of this experiment is the image repair phase of the experiment. So, given this negative information, can this nonprofit make a comeback through image repair strategies? And the two image repair strategies we tested were the nonprofit apologizes for this problem, or the nonprofit takes the corrective action of firing the CEO. And so we tested treatments on both of those scandals and both of these strategies. This is 4 new treatments in the experiment there. So we're comparing the people who got the scandal from the last set to a brand new set of people who learned about the scandal and either an apology or firing the CEO. So an example of what this looks like. Once again, a simulated press release. Right in the title of this press release, America Together apologizes after receiving an F rating. An apology in the first paragraph here. We've lost sight of our mission. We are truly sorry. We recognize that we have not been as sharply focused on making sure donations reach those who need them as much as we should. So we're hammering these people over the head with the idea that this is a nonprofit that is sorry for what they've done. In this case, they're sorry for spending money inefficiently. Here's what a firing nonprofit looks like. Firing right in the title, firing right in that first paragraph here. A CEO, the chairman of the board of directors, voting unanimously, removing him from his position. Performance has left a stain on our organization's legacy. We had no choice but to remove him. So once again, hammering the survey respondent over the head with the idea that we took action, we pulled this guy from this position here. So we did that for the inefficiency, and we also had some people read apologies and firings for the pay and the perks scandal. And the interesting takeaway, I'm going to take those in reverse order here, and then I'll be done here. The interesting finding from the attempts at image repair are that in almost every case, it doesn't work. Apologizing for that scandal involving the pay and the perks across the board had no significant effects on evaluations of this nonprofit organization. And attempts to fire the CEO only in 2 of those 9 cases had the effects that a nonprofit might look for. Firing the CEO got them, regained them a little bit of ground when it came to whether or not this nonprofit had good judgment, and it got them a little bit of ground back on this question of whether or not America Together was a moral nonprofit. But in most cases, image repair strategies following this scandal involving the pay and the perks doesn't seem to work. Perhaps even more interesting, image repair on the inefficiency scandal, also in almost every case, has no significant effect on attitudes, but in the cases in which these image repair strategies are significant, they're significant in the opposite direction that we would expect. So we found instances in which these image repair strategies backfire on the nonprofit. Small levels of backfiring, I would say, only a handful of percentage points, but apology, the people who got the apology thought that this nonprofit had worse leadership than the people who just read about the scandal itself. The people who read the apology thought that the nonprofit had worse judgment, and firing only worked in one case. But it's this fascinating idea that we think image repair is going to work one way, and we think that it's going to work in general. And instead, we see that neither of these strategies all that effective. Firing the CEO works in some instances, but I think it's important to also keep in mind this idea that image repair can backfire. So I'm going to stop there, and I have all sorts of thoughts about where this the sort of next questions and next steps in this research, but I'm going to let you guys ask those questions rather than me try to steal the answers. Thank you. 2 questions.
Hi, that's super interesting. The question I have is, and this might be outside the scope of the experiment that you ran, but did you look into at all any of the nonprofits just defending or theoretically defending their decision, like making free market arguments about pay for CEOs or the cost of doing business, or instead of doing any image repair, just defending how they run their nonprofit?
Yes. So this is sort of the perhaps next steps of this project. I've come up with a few next steps. The first would be to perhaps look at other image repair strategies like you suggested. And there are a whole host of them in that image repair literature. Types of nonprofits might be an interesting way to move forward here. Another, as I was prepping this presentation over the last few days, in fact this morning, I came up with another potential way to test this, which would be the sort of elite attempted assassination on the part of a nonprofit versus what if we just showed the survey respondents a fake email forward to see if there's sort of well, this is a legitimate group making this attack, so we trust it more than, say, a random email that you're seeing. So there are all sorts of ways we can manipulate this type of experiment moving forward. But I do really like that idea. If I can find the money for it, I'll be trying to do it, as is with many of these sorts of things. Yes?
I was wondering, I just saw, I think it was a Pew survey looking at trust in different types of institutions. And from 2016 to 2017, every institution went down 3 to 12 points, but it was particularly dramatic for CEOs. And I'm wondering, in terms of the apologies acting in a kind of unexpected way, whether or not people have just become so cynical about what CEOs will say that apologies no longer have the same kind of impact that people like Benoit would indicate that they would.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I don't even think it's just sort of the we are desensitized to what CEOs do. I think in some ways as a culture we might be increasingly desensitized to a lot of these image repair strategies, no matter who is delivering them. So we see the sort of transparency of the apology, and a lot of the negativity is baked in by the scandal, and no matter what you do, it's seemingly difficult for a lot of these groups to move forward. I mean, I'm happy finding some effects as is. I went into this thinking, oh, people are going to see right through these image repair strategies, and these sorts of scandals are the sorts of big scandals that it's going to be tough to come back from. So I'm glad that I at least found some positive effects. I'm sort of shocked that I found the negative effects that I did. But yeah, I think it's going to be increasingly difficult, regardless of who's delivering these strategies, for them to be effective moving forward.
It also kind of adds to the growing literature that when these image repair strategies are tested in an experimental situation, they don't go as predicted from the literature that was set out that would be prescriptive.
Yeah, I think we're sort of seeing more in that part that I sped through there and didn't get to. You know, a lot of this literature is the sort of single case, post hoc examination of these things, and when we get in the lab and we deal with entities that these respondents are not familiar with, we see a sort of very controlled response to image repair that perhaps we don't necessarily see in the real world, but I'd argue that some of this approach is perhaps more generalizable in some ways than a lot of that literature that focuses on one case. Thank you.
As you may have noticed, we're running a bit behind schedule, but I've been given the wink of approval by Serge. So that's mine. We've got one final speaker coming up. That's Josh Compton from Dartmouth College, who's done important work on inoculation theory, which was already mentioned in the first talk. And he's going to speak about inoculation theory, image repair, image prepare, and character assassination. Good morning. My research program looks at persuasion at 2 points in a timeline: before an attack is made and after an attack is made. So my post-attack work relies and builds on Bill Benoit's image repair typology, and I have taken his typology into contexts like politics and marketing and sport. For example, I analyzed the image repair efforts of Representative Joe Wilson after he shouted "You lie" at President Obama during a State of the Union address. I've analyzed the image repair efforts of a fast food chain, Arby's, after a criticized television campaign. And I've analyzed whether or not college football coaches and administrators can engage in image repair during or immediately following losing seasons of their teams. With the pre-attack research, I use inoculation theory, and I take it into similar contexts. I've taken it into the context of politics, of marketing, and of sport. In politics, I look to see whether or not political candidates can inoculate their image against late-night comedy ridicule. I look to see whether or not we could inoculate college students against predatory credit card marketing. And I look to see whether or not college football coaches and administrators could inoculate losing support of their fans before they anticipate the season. By the way, the answers to those three areas are no, yes, and maybe. I've also taken inoculation into some other contexts too. Most recently, my work has looked at issues facing college students. I've looked to see whether or not we could inoculate college students against the temptation to engage in plagiarism and other forms of academic misconduct, with some encouraging results there. We've looked to see whether or not we could help college students protect their attitudes about risky behaviors like binge drinking and unprotected sex. And most recently, we've taken inoculation into the public speaking classroom to see if we could help to inoculate college students against some of the negative implications of public speaking anxiety prior to their speeches. That study's coming out next month, actually,
And here's the spoiler alert. Yes, we actually can, through a very simple one-page statement that raises and refutes some of their concerns about public speaking before their speech. They'd experienced lower negative aspects of public speaking, and what anxiety did remain, because we don't want to get rid of all of it, they were able to rechannel as public speaking enthusiasm in their speeches. So that was a really exciting finding. As a speech professor and as a stutterer, you might imagine that that topic is particularly important to me, and I was thrilled to find that as well. So I love the research that I do in these two areas, image repair and inoculation. And when I saw the call for this conference and started to look at the research you all do, I learned that I love that too. So I really enjoyed learning from you over the past weekend, and I'm anxious to see what might come next. I also looked on Friday at this tweet when I got into my hotel from your conference. I guess this is a talk that happened maybe in one of the classrooms on Friday, and this caught my eye, this idea that no one is immune to character assassination. But what if we could be? What if we could develop immunity toward character assassination? Maybe not completely, maybe not we're completely protected from it, but what if we could become inoculated against character assassination, to develop pre-treatment messages that would help before the attack is even launched? And I think inoculation theory might be an interesting way of looking at some of these issues. Inoculation theory works the way that you probably think it does when you hear its name, inoculation theory. As John pointed out earlier, the explanatory is based on a medical analogy. And the idea is we can become inoculated against persuasion in much the same ways that we're inoculated against viruses, through pre-exposure to a weakened form of that virus, which triggers this process, or as we're learning more and more, these processes that help bolster resistance to the stronger attack when it comes later. So here's a study that I did with some colleagues at the University of Kentucky, and this is the one that looked at protecting college students against risky behaviors, like binge drinking and unprotected sex. And these are some numbers that we would expect to find in an inoculation study. I could draw your attention to the most important one as far as practical effects, and that's the attitude toward the advocated position. So if we're advocating avoiding binge drinking, or we're advocating protected sex over unprotected sex, you would hope that the attitudes of the inoculation condition would be higher than the control condition. And indeed, that's the case. I'll come back to those other variables in just a second. First, let me tell you how we think inoculation seems to be working. And that's through a process of threat and counter-arguing. Now, threat in inoculation is a feeling. Threat is this idea that you hold this position, you're pretty confident in it, you think that it's the right position, but you're suddenly presented with information that makes you realize that that position might be vulnerable, that there might be people launching attacks on that position, on that attitude, on that belief. And so we experience vulnerability. We experience a bit of fear about that. It makes us uncomfortable. And we know from Fessinger's cognitive dissonance research that when we're uncomfortable, we work to try to resolve that amount of discomfort. Here's one way that we try to elicit threat in inoculation messages. This is from an early study in the early 2000s, where we were analyzing moderately involving issues in terms of issues that college students care enough about that they might become resistant to change, but not so much that they already have really solid positions on it. I'll let you take a look at that one. That's the forewarning component of an inoculation message. By the way, if you were pro-marijuana, you would have received a message that just changed the verbiage there, right? So it would say, marijuana is not a harmful drug. It should be legal, despite this fact. So we gave messages that matched their pre-existing attitude and belief. That's one of the boundary conditions for inoculation theory. You have to be healthy before you're inoculated. You have to have the right attitude in place before you're inoculated. If I have the flu, I can't get the flu shot. And be protected from the flu. I have to get it before I'm attacked. Here's another one that we used. And same thing here. We also had a version of this message that said the opposite, depending on what the pre-attitude was. So in inoculation research, we look to see if we've generated some threat after the pre-treatment message. This idea that, hey, you have the right idea, but there are some arguments out there that are really strong, and it might make you change your mind. And we want threat to be higher in inoculation than in control, and that's what we got here. That's only part of the equation to how inoculation confers resistance. The other part's counter-arguing. Now, part of the counter-arguing is a message feature. So in an inoculation message, we usually start with a forewarning, and then we give them a model counter-argument, like this one. Typical inoculation message has 2 or 3 of these pairs. Right? So the forewarning followed by 2 or 3 refuted counter-arguments. There's the counter-argument part. You go back to the analogy, that's the virus. Right? Here's the refutation. And so those two together provide a weakened version of the counter-argument. What's kind of neat about inoculation is I don't have to raise and refute every counter-argument that people might face. As long as I raise and refute some, 2 or 3, it theoretically provides protection against any argument against that position. And the effects are often long-lived, at least a few weeks. Research that has tested finds that the effects last at least a few months. And one study found that the effects of a single inoculation treatment lasted almost 2 years. So this is causing a robust change in the way people are thinking about the issues. It's not just learning how to refute that specific counter-argument. It's fundamentally just changing how people think. So here's an example from the real world. And I didn't realize when I put this together that I would be put on a panel that was specifically called Not Politics. And so sorry, this is a political example. So take a quick look. I'll go through it fast since I broke the rules here. That's a line from one of President Obama's speeches in 2011. And you can see the basic format of counter-argument plus refutation. Here's another one. And guess what year that was spoken? Yeah, one might think, 1992. This is George Bush. Yeah, it's even a different party than maybe you were expected to do. So that's the counter-arguing in the real world. So if we go back to that chart that I gave you earlier, I told you that one part of counter-argument is the actual model of an actual counter-argument plus refutation. What we're really interested in, though, for trying to figure out the mechanisms of how inoculation is working, is how it causes you to counter-argue on your own after reading the inoculation message. So we actually tried to tap into recipients' thoughts. Are they raising and refuting their own counter-arguments after reading one of these inoculation messages? And yeah, they are. You can see there in this study, again, this is the same risky behavior study, counter-arguing output is higher in the inoculation conditions than in the control condition. So it is fundamentally changing how people are thinking. And a really neat study, I think, I'm biased, I was part of it, found that this counter-arguing isn't just internal. It's actual interpersonal communication. This goes back to something Catherine asked earlier in that first session. People who read inoculation messages, in this study we were looking at, I think it was the marijuana issue and the handgun issue. We found the same conventional variables, threat and counter-arguing, threat and attitude change, but we also found that it was changing how they talked about the issue. If you read a two-sided message, it not only causes you to think more about the issue, it causes you to talk more about the issue too. It actually creates dialogue. Let me go back to that just a second. It increases the number of, by the way, PIT stands for post-inoculation talk. It increases how many partners that you've talked with about the issue, and how many conversations that you've had about the issue. And that's great finding, because we're finding that inoculation is creepy in a way, because we're talking about changing the way people fundamentally think about issues. I'm really relieved to know that a potential antidote for bad inoculation is that it's causing people to reach out and then talk to others about the issue. So hopefully that's a way for truth to win out. That's inoculation theory in a nutshell. My other work is in image repair. And just quickly, because I'm going to talk about how I'm going to try to synthesize the two together in the concept of character assassination. Most of my work uses Gilbanoid's typology. I'm a big fan of that. I use it often as a way to analyze rhetorical messages. It says, in essence, that we have 5 options when an image has been damaged. And then to add even more nuance, we also have tactics that are behind these 5. A new edition of his book, Image Repair, Tactics, Uses, and Apologies. I think I have the title right. It's 2015. Most of my work has treated inoculation and image repair separately. But what I've been thinking about lately is whether or not I could combine the two. I started image repair work back in the year 2000, and inoculation theory work soon after, but for some reason I've always kept those on parallel tracks. But why not combine them? Why not look at image repair used in an inoculation format? Something that I'm calling image prepare. Because how could you not? So what I'm thinking might happen is we start to look at these image repair strategies that we've conventionally thought of post-attack rhetorical means, but with an inoculation format, so with the addition of threat and counter-argument. And one of the reasons why I'm so confident that this at least might work is because if you study the inoculation messages we've been using since the late 1960s, we're already using these strategies. We just haven't identified them yet to look for these similarities. So here's one that we use where we use a preemptive denial. Back to handguns again. And I'm arguing that any of those strategies could be used preemptively. Even a pre-apology for something that you haven't done yet, but that you think that you might. Right? Could you inoculate through a pre-apology? How would that fit with character assassination? I don't know yet. I think that there's overlap. That's why I'm here, is to find out some more about that. I see it in practice. One of my students from my inoculation class sent me a link to this example from just a few days ago. This is whenever Jeff Sessions was up for confirmation. That looks like a forewarning to me. And then this looks a lot like counter-arguments and refutations. So that's something that Ted Cruz published in Politico. We knew that Ted Cruz would get 2 appearances in this panel. So I'm excited where this work could be going. I think it's 2 very robust fields that if we synthesize them, maybe something neat will happen. And character assassination seems to me to be a really neat place to try that out.
Thank you very much for the talk. It's thrilling to think about it. I'm just not entirely sure if the metaphor you're choosing, like the human immune system and the human mind, if they really work the same way. Because, I mean, if you're inoculated against measles, you're protected for the rest of your life. But the human mind doesn't work this way. So what prevents there to be an arms race in the public of inoculation and counter-inoculation? I mean, people who are against science and against scientific findings, they could use the same kind of techniques. So, and it seems to me it's just a matter of resources again, who is having a bigger needle, so to speak.
Yeah, the measles example is one hard for me to refute. The flu vaccine helps me better to make the analogic link, because that is yearly. Tetanus shots, you have to get booster shots every 10 years to keep it robust. Maybe measles, if we lived longer than we lived, we might find that we would also need some sort of booster session there. In answer to your other question, yeah, absolutely. One of the neat things that I was going to mention that I forgot, and so I'm really glad that you asked this question, is what if character assassination comes in the form of an inoculation message? What options would we have to beat inoculation? Inoculation was developed to try to beat bad persuasion. There's been much less research to look at how to beat bad inoculation, although it happens all of the time. Some of my research suggests that the refutations of these counter-arguments don't even have to be strong for you to be inoculated. There's been one study that I know of by some of my friends at the University of Oklahoma. I shouldn't call them my friends, should I, John? Because then you'll get attacked later. Some of my co-authors, some of my scholars, my highly reputable scholar friends at the University of Oklahoma tried to see if you could inoculate against inoculation. And they found success that way. It gets really meta, it gets creepy ×2, I think, with that. But there are some options there for how to promote inoculation.
So I'm thinking about Dan Kahan's work, who talks a lot about our tribal nature and how we build our identities around groups and identity. So my identity becomes I care about business, or my identity becomes I care about science. So I'm wondering about individual differences in how people respond to inoculation. So I'm presuming it's harder to get to vaccinate me to encourage me to have cognitive dissonance over climate change if my identity is deeply pro-business.
And you hit something so critical there, Catherine. Inoculation works best when you're at a moderate involvement level with the issue. So you care enough about it to experience threat. Because if I'm told I'm going to be challenged on a position that doesn't matter much to me, I'll just kind of shrug and say, okay, who cares? What happens there? If I care so much about it, if I'm highly involved with the issue, I also won't be able to undergo threat. Because I'm already so confident in that you can tell me I'm going to be challenged, but I'm going to reject the forewarning. So the moderate level is whenever we find the most robust inoculation effects. Yeah.
There are often more than one argument against, many ideas often have more than one argument that we may wish to inoculate.
Yeah.
I realize that you're just giving us experimental data, but in an actual inoculation program, how far can you inoculate against many different ideas or counter arguments?
You can.
Counter arguments?
Yeah, we've tested what's called reputational same and reputational different messages. So I can raise the argument that they're going to encounter later and inoculate against that. That's not that exciting, right? But if I tell you what they're going to say and how to respond to it, of course you can resist that. But it also works to arguments that I didn't even mention in this message, as long as it's in the same idea family.
But yeah, when I saw your example with the Second Amendment, and my immediate reaction was, well, but back in the day when the Second Amendment was created, everybody owned a gun. And the idea was that states could call a militia together, and so you didn't want to keep people from having guns, individuals from having guns.
Where we came up with the specific counter-arguments was by pre-testing what arguments would resonate most with our experimental conditions. So,
Josh, I just had a question about whether we've seen an overlap with social judgment theory, because what we just mentioned previously. So people who are more sensitive or vulnerable towards manipulation will be in the latitude of non-commitment, because we can really those who are in acceptance or in rejection latitude, right? But in the latitude of non-commitment, I think it's 25%. Those are pretty much your targets, right?
That's right. Yeah, and that's not to say that you can't give inoculation messages to everybody. And sometimes they'll be persuasive, even. Like I could give an inoculation message that went against somebody's initial attitude, and it moves them more toward my advocated position. I don't call that inoculation. I call that persuasion, two-sided message persuasion, right? I think that inoculation has defined boundary conditions. It's pre-attack on an issue in which the right attitude is already in place. Right being conditional based on what the advocated campaign's position is. Thank you.